Okay, I'm gonna react to part of a video. I saw a short of like Vlad's doing the same thing, and I'm gonna watch Niandra's video here. And I'm only gonna look at the parts for balance, though. I don't want to watch the whole thing. I just want to see, what the Overwatch player side of things feels, and see how well it lines up with what I was talking about in my video about easy to understand, difficult to master, control, consistency, counterplay, stuff like that. So I'm just going to jump right into it.
Alright, that's a long enough intro, let's get into my first section, which is balancing. Okay, so I was actually pretty on board with the Season 9 shakeup when it came out. I also recognised that it left a lot of heroes behind, meaning I wasn't going to immediately freak out when they then buffed things. Power creep was definitely a concern, but there were also heroes that suddenly felt lacking in identity or just kinda lackluster. But it's been a few months now, and I'm not as confident. Essentially, I just worry we've lost focus a little bit. Personally, there's a couple of things that started making me uneasy. One of them being, how do I word this, rules that have an asterisk. Basically things like tanks having boop resistance, but Jungle Queen's knife specifically pulls them further.
Okay, so we're already talking about consistency and control. Back in Overwatch One, any boop or thing that pushed you was generally always kind of like pretty similar. And now, to make Junker Queen feel better, in order to make her work, you need to have um, a greater pull potential, but Lucio has to have limited boot potential because of the fact that if it's a solo tank, you just get pushed around a lot. Uh, so yeah, already, from a player's perspective, consistency is a problem and it is confusing.
I only learnt the other day that Iardi still does full headshot damage against tanks despite their passive because she has a different multiplier.
I didn't know that, but also, yeah, consistency. Like you wouldn't think about that, and it's not easy to understand. Nobody would just sit there and go, "Oh, tanks have different headshot damage, but Alari's, got her own."
Regardless of my opinion on these as individual changes, it makes me think two things. One, I worry about the new player experience because live service games inherently become less penetrable over time, and
It's going away from that easy to understand, difficult to master. So new players aren't going to be like new players. Yeah, new players are going to have a hard time, but also even the existing player base probably doesn't know that. I've been playing for 8 years, and I didn't know Alari had different headshot damage. Like that wouldn't make any sense.
two, if we have started to need complicated micro rules or big buffs for every tank in order to make the role appealing, what does that say about the core foundation Overwatch is currently built on? Because if the foundation is poor, then we're just kind of throwing shit on top of something that doesn't work, which quickly becomes a mess without ever actually solving things. The more
That is true. Um, and what they've been doing with 5v5 is they made uh one person more valuable than the rest, and I talked about that in my last video, right? Where because of the fact that they made them so valuable, now if there is a diff at all in terms of like the tank, you can't make up for that on any role. There's nothing that you can do, and the only thing that they can do is then try to add more stats onto the tank in order to make them feel like they can actually play the game more. But then it just makes them even more valuable, which then ruins the experience for everyone else. Overwatch 1 felt better because of the fact that you could technically outplay a tank no matter what. Like I said before, like you could outplay Roadhog as Tracer if you played right. But currently in Overwatch 2, you can't do that anymore. You have to have your tank there to help you. You have to have your team there to back you up because you can't do it solo anymore. So you have less control in your game because of the fact that they've had to buff the tanks to be ridiculously high in order to make them feel like they might even have the slightest bit of fun. But that just takes away from everybody else. And the more they lean into that direction of giving tanks health rather than counterplay options, the worse that problem is going to get. And then you created this game which had sort of very fluid dynamic of just like, do I want to fight the tank? Do I want to fight the DPS? Do I want to fight the support? Now, what people don't understand is there is a correct way to play, and it does change from time to time. Uh, even in season 12, people are like, oh, don't shoot the tank, don't shoot the tank. But sometimes you shoot the tank. Sometimes you shoot the support. Sometimes you shoot the DPS. But like, because of the fact that each role is so uniquely like it's one thing. Like, and then that's one thing that it does. If you have the DPS, it applies the passive. If you have the supports, they provide the immortalities. If you have the tank, they just need to stay alive. But it's constantly shifting around from like, you fight, if the tank is out of position and you can solo and just kill them, then you should do that. But it requires the entire team to do so. Um, DPS, if you kill one DPS, it's actually not beneficial for you to shoot the supports. It's more beneficial for you to shoot the other DPS so that way there's no one to apply the passive, right? And if you kill one support, then you want to go to the other support because then there's no healing. Like in Overwatch 1, nobody had that much of a value on them for staying alive. You could always sort of, you could lose a tank, you could lose a support, you could lose a DPS, and you could lose both your DPS and you could still technically turn it around. Or you could lose a tank and you could still turn around. You can't do that in Overwatch 2. And that's one of the biggest problems that it's having in this format changes is just not only is it one tank that makes it worse, but then you have the DPS passive and healers being specifically sort of like the heal bot immortality monsters that they've created. That's just made it more one dimensional.
Patches that build off of Season 9, the harder it becomes to go backwards. To say, okay, that was fun for a bit, and fair play to the devs for taking a big risk, but is it really making things easier for the balance team? I don't know, it just kind of feels like the devs are slowly reverting things anyway. I could not tell you which characters still had bigger hitboxes and who's been reverted. The DPS passive has also gone back and forth and now affects tanks less, plus there was even some talk of
DPS passive affects tanks less. Oh, it does affect tanks less. It's another thing where, like, once again, because you don't recognize uh y- because it's not this common rule across the board, it just doesn't really work. Like, it makes it more complicated and it's just more shit to think about. Season 9 took away that difficulty to master, but made everything easier to do, and it was a step in the wrong direction. And it was fun for a little bit because stuff was finally dying again. So it finally mixed up that whole like, oh, supports just dominate everything with their 20-minute long queue times. Uh, but the only thing that we learned from that is that, in an FPS game, people want to be able to kill people. Like they want to be able to get elims and whatnot. And the first 2 weeks of season 9 was when the game was the most fun, and that's when Lucio and Moira were the support meta, right? And then gradually over time, they started, nerfing and buffing everybody else. And then all of a sudden, it goes back to the immortality heroes being back in the meta. Kiriko came back in real quick in mid-season patch, and then people started to have less and less fun again. I wonder why. Like, it's just not enjoyable when stuff doesn't get taken down. When there's that rush, there's that constantly like you're in the action with Dive, Lucio, Moira, Winston, Tracer. Like people were having more fun. Uh, Stuff needs to be able to die. Like it's better to have abilities that play offensively and defensively than ones that have such high value for doing little next to nothing in terms of like the skill versus the reward ratio.
a few heroes getting lower health pools. Basically, the main point I'm trying to make in this section is that to me, it sort of feels like they had a decently strong vision with Season 9, but then that vision has eroded over the last few months. Although I will say, giving everyone the ability to self-heal out of combat, that has been a fantastic success, at least in my opinion. In fact,
I will disagree on that one. I don't necessarily like the self heal. Um, I think that it's decent. It's not the worst thing in the world. If they were to leave that in, it's kind of okay. But I like the idea of playing around my supports and playing around health packs and sort of having that advantage. Uh, I understand that a lot of people might find me different on this one, and even then, like if this one were to stay, if they reverted everything from season 9 except for that, I'd still be okay with it. It's not the worst end of the world decision. I just like the way it was before, where there was a sort of knowing where the health packs were and then playing around your supports and whatnot that I enjoyed. I enjoyed more. Um, but yeah, it's fine.
I kinda can't believe we went years without this. Like, when I played Marvel Rivals, I immediately missed it. Another thing I do want to give credit to is that the devs are responding to some changes fairly fast. For example, after the big tank buff patch, it only took us 3 days to get some follow-up changes, which was really nice. I do have a lot of sympathy for the balance team because they kinda can't win here. There's just so many different types of players that want or need different things, right?
I don't it's not that I don't sympathize with the balance team. It's just that I think you can win. I think you can do better, but it's just once again, because the way that they're buffing and the way that they're going about things is they're looking at statistics as a whole. And the statistics as a whole are just like they're looking at the win rates and who's struggling and who's not struggling. And like most recently in the midseason patch for season 12, we saw Hog and Orisa get buffed because they're not performing so well. But once again, like the reason why they're not performing well is because of the fact that when they do, they dominate and they're not fun to go against because Roadhog, there is no counterplay to him, but he has the ability to one shot you. That is incredibly frustrating. And the only way to counterplay him is if your supports go Ana. And then even if your supports go Ana, then that Roadhog requires you play a Kiriko. And this is what I mean by it's one dimensional. You have to play a certain way because me as Tracer, I can't outplay a Roadhog anymore. And buffing him to get higher and more health means that I need to clip him like 8 times without getting hit a single time in order to kill him. Like that's not fun. That's not fun at all. And the fact that he can just one shot or even one shot a tank by hooking them off of like a ledge or something, it feels unfair. So while I understand the balance team is up against things, tweaking Roadhog's numbers up or down in order to improve his win rate or whatnot, it isn't going to change the fact that from the player perspective, the game feel of it feels like there was nothing you could do. You feel incredibly frustrated because you're like, well, he was healing and I stunned him out of his heal, but then he healed up and killed me anyway. Or I, you know, I stunned him out of his ultimate, but I only interrupted him for a few seconds, and he got back in and did it again. Like they're giving so much control to all players all the time that then it feels like even when you see that someone made a mistake, you can't capitalize on that mistake because it's not a mistake anymore. Uh, because there's nothing Roadhog can do that could possibly put him into a position where he's going to die unless he's really just standing out in the open for long enough periods of time that he just takes that much damage. And realistically, the higher up you climb, the less likely that is going to happen. So, yes, although I feel for the balance team and that it is a tough job, I don't, I think that their focus on win rates is not the way to go about doing things. I think I, I believe that that is the problem. It's not about the win rates. It's about the counterplay options from the other player's perspective. Not just what you can do as a player, but what you can do to counterplay.
I generally watch every episode of SVB's Group Up podcast, and even amongst content creators, there's not one single vision everyone shares. I've seen multiple creators who say they like it when Overwatch does silly or fun changes, but the difference between a change that's wacky and one that's just dumb is purely subjective, and even creators don't always agree on which one something is. This is also exacerbated by the way that social media algorithms encourage us to get our thoughts out as soon as possible. Because if you don't drop a video immediately after patch notes go live, you're losing viewers to a creator who did. This means we can be, to put it lightly, a bit reactionary sometimes. Also, this is not meant to be a call out, by the way, especially to anyone in particular. I love my fellow creators, I have a huge amount of respect for them, especially the ones that stream for like 24 hours straight, because like, how do you not just fall asleep? This is more so a reminder that the community isn't a monolith and that empathy goes a long way here. I realized a while back I have a better time with Overwatch if every so often I simply say, okay, I don't personally like this change, but at least I can see who it's meant for. Now admittedly, sometimes I struggle to see who a change is for, and that's when I tend to get concerned. Overwatch is never going to be perfectly balanced, and I actually think people would get bored if it was. That's why a lot of the focus for this section was on core foundation and overall direction of the game. Moving on, I want
Okay. Yeah, I don't, there's going to be times where for sure you wonder where the change is coming from and who it's for. Uh that, you know, that I think the only problem I have is that you should always be taking into consideration like how this affects things as a whole and not just in a vacuum, right? Um uh, when you make changes to, a character or to heroes and whatnot, you're trying to improve the player experience for that person. But I think that's the reason why like Overwatch has been so frustrating for me and for many others is that you're you're looking at it from how to improve like the Orisa player's experience, how to improve the Hog player's experience, right? And you're not looking at it in terms of like a counterplay sort of viewpoint that, okay, well, this could improve Hog's performance, but also how would it feel on the other end? And that's constantly what I keep getting at with Overwatch 2 is that you have less options. Like, oh, I'm gonna diva bomb a Cassidy who's out in the open. Oh, but he used dodge roll. So his dodge roll makes it so he lives. Okay, well, I guess that feels great for the Cassidy, but because of the game is based off of elims, you saw someone who's wildly out of position. You could kill him, and he could use his roll to get behind cover, but there's no space. So you throw a diva bomb, and he rolls, and he's able to survive. Like Diva Bomb was already like lackluster feeling. Why is it that with all these characters with so many mobility moves and different things to get out of the way, the one hero that shouldn't really be able to survive is able to survive by rolling? Like stuff like that just feels terrible. Like you're giving players so much control that once again there's no counterplay because then it feels like you need to kill someone 2 or 3 times before you actually are able to kill them. Uh, and the best thing you're trying to do is essentially you're trying to get the team to burn resources so that way hopefully your team can be able to pick up the slack and kill the people because they don't have any resources. But it's frustrating when you can sit there and be like, okay, I'm going to go and I'm going to try and jump on someone and kill them. It's like, oh, but they got life gripped. And it's like, okay, well, I'm going to jump and try and attack somebody else. It's like, oh, well, they got Suzu'd. And then you're sitting there and you're like, well, I took out both immortalities and my team still lost. And it's like, that's 2 picks you could have had, but they have like free abilities that just allow you to negate what happens, that it makes the game not fun. And that's just from the immortality side. That's not talking about the abilities that everyone has in order to negate their own sort of like, have their own sort of survival. Uh, Good abilities are ones that don't have all of, that don't have a long list of like, oh, here's what this ability does, right? Here's all of the things that this one ability does. It does one thing. Lucio has boop and he has speed or heal. He can wall ride, but otherwise it's a tool and how you use that tool in interesting ways is what makes that character, right? Look at the old Overwatch heroes and look at the new ones. The new ones are way overly complicated. And when you press a button, it just does something for you versus it's a tool to do something, right? That's the difference between the two different kinds of abilities is a good way to design ability is one that's used as a tool. Like, oh, this is a movement ability, and how you decide to use that movement ability actually sort of matters. There's some sort of creativity there behind how you express that. Whereas a lot of supports, for some reason, they're just so bad at designing supports that for them, they just auto aim heals, like 9 out of 10 of them. And then you just press the ability and it does the thing. And that's very unrewarding to play. It's very unrewarding to go against because you need to perform perfectly. Uh, so although I understand that, like, yes, sometimes you're going to balance it, you're going to make things for somebody, it might not be for you. Like, there's going to be a patch where Pharah is just played all the time, and that's what they want that season. Like, there is a way, and there was a way, like the famous 2020 patch people always talk about, which was like, oh, well, back then people were playing all heroes. It's just like, yes, it's possible the closer you get to it, because then it felt like the risk to reward ratio in terms of like, okay, I could play this hero and I could play this one, but like the matchups seem relatively fair versus the risk reward, right? Because the risk you take as a certain hero and the ability to deny that hero needs to be equal to the same, right? That's the reason why people always had an issue with Immortality Lamp in the past and why people have an issue with Immortalities now. The risk to reward to using those is vastly different. Um, all right, let me take a look at because they have one 6v6 section down here. I'm gonna skip the rest of it. Just go to that.
And it helps fill the gap left by Blizzard a little bit. Moving on, let's talk 6v6 versus 5v5. I intentionally waited until Aaron's monster 6v6 block came out before finishing this video just to be safe. Firstly, I just want to say I think some people can get pretty nasty about this topic. I don't think it's fair for pro 5v5ers to say that 6v6ers are blinded by nostalgia and have rose tinted glasses. But I also think it's kinda irritating when I'm discussing an unrelated topic and someone sarcastically brings up 6v6, especially when it's presented as an instant fix the game button. And that's the big thing to keep in mind, right? Like with any change to the foundation, there's a lot of baggage that comes with it.
And this goes back to once again what I said in my other video. 6v6 will help alleviate a lot of problems. It is not the magical cure all fix all button because of the fact that you still have the same problems of not being able to counterplay certain situations, right? Uh, like Diva's defense matrix, for instance. I think back in the day, it might even used to be like instant that you could like press it, and then they made it there was a delay, so that way you still had to like time it. Like it was instant when you pressed it, but you couldn't just keep like spamming it, right? That's one of those things that's good because yes, it takes away some of the control from Diva, but then it's still just saying like, hey, you can still negate grabs and blizzard ultimates and pulses, but you actually need to know when it's going to happen. You need to be able to predict that. That opens more windows of opportunity for counterplay, right? Um, but what Overwatch 2 has done is that the more you give control to everybody, the more people have less control over their games because recognizing who's made a mistake is much more difficult because a lot of times you have to people have to make so many mistakes before they get punished for it. Um, and yeah, that's the reason why like 6v6 will help the game, but it is not a magical fix all button right now. It is like it's going to switch over to that mode and it might feel a little bit better, but the projectile size changes still happen. The immortalities still exist the way that they do. Roadhog cannot exist even with like lowered health in that state that he's in right now. I still don't think that that's a good change. Aris is still not fun to play against because it's Aris and Hog suffer from the same problem of you're shooting a brick wall that you can't outplay, and the only thing that you can do is eventually shoot enough that hopefully the wall falls down, and that's not fun.
I have absolutely no doubt that 6v6 would be a huge, huge success initially. In fact, I think the devs would be out of their minds not to use it as a season hook to draw in players. What matters and concerns me is long-term sustainability. Ultimately, I don't mind which format we go with, but I'm worried we'll end up in a scenario where like, we love 6v6 for the first few months, then the cracks start to appear, maybe the devs don't balance it the way people expect, and we end up just as miserable, but other aspects of the game have been neglected because so many resources went into supporting a format change. Like, I would want them to put the work in to give 6v6 a fair shot. I don't want the devs to half-ass it and then say, look, see, it doesn't work, you guys can shut up now. My biggest concern
I am concerned about that. I am concerned that they're going to put changes to 6v6 that get it to actually function well, um, and they find that it's not possible to balance. And realistically, because they designed the game around 5v5, what people don't know from like the game developer standpoint is that yes, uh you do optimize a game to work very specifically with whatever it is you're playing around. So I could understand that like it's not meant for 6v6 in terms of like the effects, the server load, and everything else. And same too, like there's a lot of ultimates that I think are really bad for the game that are also like effect heavy. Um, I don't know how effect heavy Kitsune Rush is, but it's a large AoE. Ram alt is another one that's like it's not interesting in terms of like how it's used and the counterplay. Like you just press a button and now you're just this massive thing that everyone needs to stand away from. And the counterplay to that and the skill expression is kind of meh. Like I miss the days when, Tracer's ultimate was you threw a pulse bomb. It's just a powerful grenade. It's not, some massive AoE big insta kill thing, right? Um, Soldier's visor is useful, but it's very kind of like like it's strong, but it's also not at the same time, right? Um, Deadeye is also another one of those where it's just like it's a kind of meh ultimate. More people started to use it to reload more than anything else, but you could still get some decent Deadeyes occasionally. Whereas then you had like Sojourn enter the picture where it's just like, hey, if you can click heads, like you'll just demolish an entire team. Um, and it's like, or you have Ram ult where it's like, hey, if you're entering into an overtime and you have Ram ult, you could just push them off just by building your ult and hitting Q. Like that kind of stuff is like it's not very creative. I don't really enjoy it in terms of like, oh well, that's a good ultimate or whatnot. Like I think Doom ult is like a good one. Doom's a great character. Junker Queen is fun. I think her ult is really good too, but then she's entirely countered by Kiriko just existing, which makes it not fun. So like what are you gonna do? You're gonna play the heroes that don't require as much skill and don't get countered by a single support on the enemy team. Like that part's not fun. Um, but yeah, 6v6, I hope that they give it a shot, but they could balance it in a way that actually makes it so they believe that like, oh, it was not going to work in the first place, and um, they will need to take time to make sure it's optimized for that.
And overall, especially after looking at the blog, is definitely queue times. I used to be someone who was
Queue times is one that bothers me because of the fact that as someone who plays all roles, I don't play as much of tank because of the fact that I have to play certain tanks, and it is a miserable experience to constantly have inconsistent healing, inconsistent damage, inconsistent everything across the board, and that supports hard counter all tanks just by existing, and that my job is to be a punching bag. Like it blows my mind when people are like, "Oh, well, we have to adjust the queue times. We have to fix the queue times." It's like, right, but you're not asking yourself why are support and DPS the most queued roles? Why? Is it because of the fact that people just don't want to play tank? Or is it because of the fact that the identity and the skills and what's needed around each role is vastly different? There is so much skill expression in terms of the large roster of DPS heroes that there is a hero for everybody in terms of how you want to play. There are so many options. Like I play Tracer, Soldier, Mei, Sombra. Those are my main picks, right? I don't play Echo. I don't play Junkrat. I don't play Sim. I don't play Pharah, right? I don't play Ash or Widow. And that's okay because my very specific set of heroes still exists within that hero pool. Uh, but there's heroes for other people to play DPS. Like there are the Widow players, there are the Ash players, there are the flyers like the Echoes uh and the Pharahs and whatnot. Like there's so many to choose from. And then you look at support, and support, you get so much value without needing to necessarily be super good. You can hang back in the safest position possible and just be pumping heals into your team and occasionally throw out, your immortalities and feel like you're doing something. And so you have this sort of barrier of entry that's much lower for support than there is for any other role because of the fact that most of them can sit in the back in the safest spot and practically play themselves, and you don't even need to necessarily aim to hit your shots. Like as far as I know, like, Ana is the only one that really needs to like aim for her healing. BAP is I'd say half of that. Alari can set up a pylon and just let that pylon exist, and Alari still needs to hit her shots, but Alari's not even popular either. And like the ones who need to aim in the support roster are the heroes that are almost never played. Like I think that's a sign that like you're sort of giving too much value to the people that don't need to aim and that don't need to have that sort of skill expression. Like people argue it's just like, oh well, you still need to time your abilities well, and you still need to have good positioning. It's like that's true for everybody in the game, but supports don't need to aim a lot of times to use their abilities. And that's the part that where it's just like, yes, it's an easy barrier to entry for a lot of people to feel like they're bringing value. But when they do that, they're also taking value away from the other roles like tank. Tank, who, like I said before, doesn't have kill potential because they don't have the DPS passive because we've overcomplicated the game and given so many different micro adjustments. And then you have heroes like Junker Queen who are immediately countered by Kiriko just existing on the enemy team. And then you have Zarya who's immediately countered just by Lifeweaver existing on the enemy team. That if you don't, not only is your hero roster in terms of like your types of heroes that you want to play and tank so much smaller, it's hard countered by the fact that supports can just exist and take value away from you, and that your kill potential is directly limited based off of what your DPS do. Like you can sit there and say like, "Oh, queue times aren't fun because nobody just wants to play tank." And I'm going to sit there and look at you and say, "You're out of your mind." Because of the fact that it's so obvious that it's not just about the fact that people don't wanna play tank. They don't wanna play tank because they don't have the hero that resonates with them, and even if it does resonate with them, like, I love playing Junker Queen, and I would play Junker Queen in situations where maybe, like, on Gibraltar or something where it does might not necessarily bring as much value, but I would still try to make her work because she's that much fun to play. But it doesn't make any sense because of the fact that counter swapping is so strong that if I don't counter swap to to do the same, I can't play my hero because I can't counterplay in that situation. And even if they don't counter swap me in terms of like the tank, if one of their supports sees that I'm Junker Queen and they just go Kiriko, I can't use my ultimate basically the entire game. And that's not fun. So you're gonna sit there and tell me like, "Oh, well, it's the queue times. We need to worry about the queue times." It's like the queue times are caused by the fact that you don't make the role fun. Like, I am a punching bag that's easily countered, and I don't get to kill. That's why people aren't having fun. That's why people burn out. That's why the only people who buy skins and continue to log in are support players. Like, everyone else eventually gets to a point where they're miserable, and at least the DPS roster has enough heroes with enough different gameplay styles that motivates them to play. You don't get that in the tank roster, and that's the problem, in my opinion.
It's like, yeah, long queue times are fine if it means fair matchmaking. Then I would wait 8 minutes and get stomped, 9 minutes and stomp the enemy. Because even the most perfect matchmaking algorithm couldn't account for someone having an off day or human error that snowballs. I've realised that the shitty matches affect my enjoyment much less if I can just get into the next game fast. Also, I just want to say, it's not actually clear how many players prefer 5v5, and I feel like no one ever considers this. People who like 5v5 generally aren't vocal about it because it's the default, we already have it, so there's less need to get involved in conversation. Samito is sort of seen as a spearhead of the 6v6 community, but could you imagine someone doing this for 5v5? No, because making videos celebrating the status quo would be kinda weird. If you are familiar with my content, you probably either know me as the useless Overwatch facts TikToker, or as someone who does educational Mercy content. Well, I also love playing Winston, and tank in general, specifically in 5v5.
I will say that watching her Winston clips, she is a really good Winston. And Winston is one of those heroes that's a fantastic design because he is incredibly easy to understand, but also incredibly difficult to master. And I think that he's another one of those tanks where it's just like you don't necessarily need to have one that has a lot of aim potential in order for them to enjoy how to play tank or enjoy playing tank. It doesn't they all don't have to be junker queens or whatnot. Like you can have your Winstons too. But still, even when you're up against a Winston, when you die to a Winston, a lot of times you can think to yourself, like, well, I could have played that better. I could have hit my shots more. But in season 12, post season 11, when they buffed all the tanks' health and armor up out, you know, to unbelievable amounts, that's not how it feels anymore. And that's what takes away from the experience of everyone else is just like, well, it doesn't feel like I could do anything because these tanks just jump on me and I die.
Generally, I don't get involved in format discussions because I know nobody is going to change their mind. It doesn't mean I don't have an opinion though. I think 6v6 had higher highs than 5v5, but it also had some really bad lows as well. During Overwatch 1, I remember my 4 stack of friends waiting in 8 to 11 minute quick play queues because none of us were queuing tank. And the reason none of us were queuing tank is because we were all burnt out from being forced to play it every single time. I also remember how if you were in the metal ranks, queuing for tank without knowing how to play Reinhardt was kind of throwing, because Rein Zarya was the only pairing people there actually liked and knew how to play, which was miserable for me because Reinhardt is one of the only tanks I don't enjoy playing. Don't get me wrong, 5v5 also has its list of issues. As a big Winton head, I am well versed in winning a single fight, and having Roadhog, Cassidy, Reaper, Zenyatta all just suddenly pop up. I don't really know how you solve the counter swapping problem without making tanks more generic and samey, or by adding restrictions to swapping, which most people probably
Restrictions to swapping is a terrible idea. Like you want people to have the option, but like right here in this situation, this is shows Sigma blocking Rhine Shield. I can't think of a more perfect time to actually like pause that and make a comment on it. Like that is counterplay. That feels good, but also that Reinhardt on the other side of that is not mad that Sigma blocked the shatter. Like he got outplayed. Like he sits there, he knows that he messed up by not like baiting the shield first. And because there is a delay in terms of like when you can pop the shield back out after you pull it out. So That is counterplay. That's what good tanking looks like. Like, technically, Reinhardt up close on Sigma, that close, counters Sigma, but Sigma blocked the shatter, so he outplayed him. Like, that's how you fix those 5v5 scenarios is you have to give players the ability to outplay someone. You need to give them the ability to feel like they did something better or had an option, not just buffing their health so that way even if they did get hit, they could still survive. That's just terrible. Like it's just not fun. Like people want to feel like they're doing something because they played well, not because they were up against like massive stat monsters.
Probably wouldn't be into. When I play tank, I love interacting with the entire enemy team. This is why I love Winston and also Sigma, where I'll shield off a sniper or block an ability or whatever. The tank games I find boring, which definitely happen in 5v5, are the ones where the enemy tank is only going for me and trying to suck me into an endless tank 1v1 where the supports are glued to us. With the exception of Malma mirrors, because those are just the funniest freaking shit I've ever seen. As I said earlier though, I am open to 6v6 and I want it to be given a fair trial, because ultimately I think the devs should do what's realistically best for the game rather than what I personally like as an individual. Maybe that's 6v6 providing a stronger core foundation, or maybe it's 5v5 just because of queue times. Alright, let's wrap up with some concluding thoughts. So if it wasn't obvious from this video, while I think Overwatch has its many problems, it's still very much a game that I love and care for. I'm also very much aware that being a content creator for this game will skew my opinions and give me blind spots. Something that I think is worth considering is that you need to be the one that cultivates a healthy relationship with this game. The developers put so much genuine passion into their work, but Overwatch is still a live service game with FOMO tactics out the ass that will try to hook itself into you. Another good thing about the seasonal structure is that you can say, okay, I'm gonna take a break for a few weeks and come back when the next one drops. But you have to be the one that does it because the game sure as shit won't.
Yeah, I think that like, seasons mix things up, but I think that with the way that they're constantly balancing things because of the fact that they're not focused on like, oh, how do we improve the counterplay so that way we make it so people want to play. Uh you just kind of like look to see like, oh, like let me check the Overwatch tier list. Like, is my hero in meta right now? No? Like, all right, maybe I'll just skip this one. Uh People wanna be able to even if necessarily the win rates aren't great, if people feel like there's possibly something like they could do to have outplayed the situation, they'll still keep playing. And that's the reason why people like me and people, like other, Overwatch creators who only now stream whenever there's a drop, and I guess, I don't know, maybe they're paid to do it or something. Uh, that's why you only see them hop in then, but otherwise they just don't wanna play anymore. Whereas, like, all of us were playing for, 8 years. I took a break during, like, GOATS meta when it was just all DP or all tanks and supports, and I just didn't enjoy that, right? I came back for, like, role queue and stuff. Uh, y like, yeah, everyone takes breaks, but, like, I could sit there and play this game like all day, every day because there was always something new to do. I was like making montages. I was trying to climb up higher in rank. Uh, there's always stuff to do where every match should feel like you're getting better or you're learning or something different is happening, and that doesn't happen in Overwatch 2 anymore because of the fact that like now you die to a tank and you're like, well, you know, what was I going to do to outplay that Roadhog? What was I going to do to outplay that Orisa? When my entire team falls down and my tank dies and I have an Orisa in front of me, I could sit there and just shoot that wall, but I'm never going to be able to kill the wall by myself. So I just have to walk away. Right. There's no opportunity for you to make those plays anymore. It just doesn't exist. So you don't want to be the playmaker. And if you're playing tank and you're sitting there and you're like, oh, like I see somebody who's out of position right in front of me. I'm gonna shatter. And like you shatter and you hit someone and you solo shatter somebody. And you're thinking to yourself as a tank, I am now going to kill this person and give us an advantage. Where even though it's a single kill, it's a single kill and we might be able to turn this fight. But the moment that you shatter, Lifeweaver grips them away and pulls them to safety. Right. That's so frustrating because of the fact that you have an ultimate and it was countered by someone pressing E on someone's body on the ground. Now imagine if instead of pressing E on them, it was used in the same way as League of Legends character Thresh has a lantern where he would throw the lantern out and you have to click the lantern in order to be brought to him. Imagine if instead of a life grip that just pulled someone, he threw something to them that was a shield that gave them a little bit of health so that way they could survive long enough to press interact and got pulled back. So that way it also solves the problem of being pulled when you don't want to, but it also provides value in terms of like, oh, I could use this as like a shield as well. Uh, but it also means that people who are in situations where they shouldn't be able to get out of, like being slammed on the ground or something, they can't just be immediately pulled to safety. That makes Reinhardt feel better. That makes Life Grip feel better from a player's perspective when you don't want to be pulled back. And it just improves the game overall, in my opinion, because then it's like, oh, well, you can't just yank somebody away from me when I've put them in a situation where they shouldn't be able to get out. Right. Uh, so yeah, like there's so many things that you can do in order to improve this game, and it has nothing, people keep focusing on all the wrong things, and it's just like you could tweak all these number values all you want, and it's not going to make a bit of difference because of the fact that like if there's no margin for error, there's no counterplay, you're eventually just going to push everybody out. They don't want to play anymore. It's not fun. Like I don't enjoy when I'm playing Tracer and I've spent years trying to learn the quote unquote hardest character in the game to master and try to bring so much value to then sit there and know that when I'm up against like uh, a BAP and a Kiriko, the best thing that I could probably do is just switch to soldier and hang back and just try and click heads from a distance because the projectile's size change made it so much easier that it's just like, it just doesn't feel like there's much fun anymore because of the fact that, like, I have to play so well and so carefully as Tracer in those areas with multiple immortalities in order to get value, when it's just easier to just say, "You know what? I'm just gonna sit back and shoot," because that's just the way that the game is played now. Like, if it's 2 immortalities and, like, a Roadhog or something, I'm like, "Well, I'm never gonna be able to kill anything." So, I just have to switch to Tracer or switch off a Tracer onto Soldier and just shoot and click heads. And in Overwatch 2, I could still outplay a single immortality and I could still outplay a Roadhog. And in or Overwatch 1, I could still do that stuff. And in Overwatch 2, I can't do that anymore. So, when people want to, say like, oh, well, they want to talk about queue times, they want to talk about how people just don't want to play tank in games. It's just like people want to play what's fun. We are game developers. I play this game so much that I could sit there and tell you that, like, as soon as even the characters that I don't play, like, I would sit there and learn just to figure out what's fun and what isn't fun about them. Like, as I climb through the ranks, what feels fair from both sides, right? I can play all of the roles. It's just, it's so frustrating because of the fact that I am a DPS main, but I love to play Ana. I love to play Zen. I love to play Junker Queen and Winston and Zarya, and it sucks because of the fact that I if they go, Bastion and I'm playing Winston, I'm countered. If they go Life Weaver and I'm playing Zarya, I'm countered. If they go Kiriko and I'm playing Junker Queen, I'm countered. Whereas I could play Ana and I'll be fine all game. I could play Zen and I could realistically still be fine all game because not only is Zen still really strong, but it's like if you have good positioning, and even if you jump on him, he has a kick. He has a counterplay option that allows you to push people away. Like the dive was the one thing he was supposed to be weak to, but they're like, let's make sure that Zen has no weaknesses. Like, let's get rid of his one weakness. Like, let's give him a tool for that. And then for tanks, it's just like, hey, let's just, when it comes to tanks, they're just like, let's just make you tankier. And tank players are like, yo, I want my ultimates to mean something. And they're like, no, 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 we can't do that. Like, that's too far. We'll just make it so you can get punched more and booped more and shot more and survive that stuff. So then people are, and then we'll make it so your bubbles are longer and your shields are bigger. So then you can't even counterplay your counters because of the fact that they're all super buffed at what they do. Like you're making tank not fun because there's no way to counterplay. You're making it miserable because there's no way for your ultimates to mean something. You're making it miserable because you're team dependent. Like, and in a game with people with a bunch of randos, you want to make sure you have agency and control over your game. And right now, you have no control, you have no consistency, you have no counterplay options. So of course, this all goes back to my other video, you're gonna blame your team, and you're not even wrong at times. Like, yes, there's always things you could have done better, but when you're playing tank, you're surviving, you're the last to die, and you were able to waste like both immortalities, but your DPS are losing on like the off angles and on the sides 1v1. There's nothing you can do because you don't have kill potential without that DPS passive. And there's just a limit in terms of how much you can provide. So the reason why tank queue times are bad is because tank isn't fun. Because there's so many things that deny them from having fun. Let them have fun. Get rid of the DPS passive, nerf healing, get rid of support immortalities that just bail people out. Make things so they have to be more creative in how they express their ways to save people. Like, you can have abilities that counter ultimates, but it has to be like on a sleep dart where the margin for error is so high that if you hit the shot, it looks cool, it feels good. But throwing an immortality down on the ground to counter a DPS's ultimate or a tank's ultimate is not fun. It's not difficult. And the value that it gives is so high. That's the reason why playing tank, you have to be perfect in order to get things done, because if you don't and like you die, you like your team just falls over. Like that's why they say like when you play tank, you'll not be the reason your team wins, but you will be the reason your team loses. Like, you know, I hope, this is coming across clearly that like it's not about tweaking the numbers, it's not about the season changes or cycling through. You can make Overwatch fun, but it has to start from looking at it from the perspective of how do I incorporate counterplay from all perspectives here into the situation? And it's fine if people are weak in certain scenarios. I'm not expecting May to be able to like have tools to counter Farah, right? I don't think that at all. Like there's certain people who have strengths and weaknesses, sure, but there's a difference between that and abilities that just provide you value with very little effort. And that's the kind of stuff that needs to change. Like it needs to be it needs to be simplified. It needs to it needs to have more consistency. And once again, like even for players who don't understand game design, one of the key takeaways from this is the micro changes and the stuff that even players who play the game every day don't know. Like you need consistency. And the Overwatch devs just I don't know. I don't know what's going on over there. But I think it's once again a focus on win rates. If we get off of that and we focus on counterplay, I think that Overwatch will do well. Um, anyway, that's a much longer video than I expected, but yeah, uh that's me reacting to Niandra's idea on balance, and maybe I'll react to some other Overwatch creators in terms of like their balance ideas. Because it's interesting to see from the player perspective, and I think that a lot of them are saying, a lot of them are feeling what I was talking about before. Overwatch is a game feel problem, not a balance problem.